Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and in this video I want to share the 15 2024 book releases that I was able to actually read this year. Been trying to make something of a more conscious effort to read new releases and that kind of thing, but I also wanted to just kind of highlight them again because these were all sent by different publishers and that sort of thing. I think I've probably shared all of them in different videos here and there, but like I said, it's just a kind of a good way to kind of highlight all the new releases and that kind of thing. There's 4 at the end that are probably like, I guess, my top if I had to like pick some, but the rest are just gonna be kind of done in alphabetical order. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. So first up, we have Alexander at the End of the World: The Forgotten Final Years of Alexander the Great by Rachel Kauser, and this was sent by Mariner Books. And this definitely was one of the better Alexander the Great histories that I've read. It focuses more after the conquest of Persia, so dealing a lot with Afghanistan, his invasion of India, and that sort of thing. Now, generally, I just don't like Alexander the Great as a character. I do think the author gives him a little bit more leniency than maybe I feel is necessary, but it's definitely not like hero worship that I've read in some other Alexander the Great books, but it's got a good blend of kind of the military political narrative, but there's also sort of the I guess the cultural ideology kind of thread going on too, with the whole concept of, she pushes like kind of Alexander's brotherhood of man. I was going to say storyline. I guess it's not really a storyline per se, but his kind of agenda there pretty heavily as well. I think it was pretty well done, but like I said, there's a couple things that get glossed over a little bit, like, for example, the march through the Gedrosian Desert. I feel like however an author handles that is how much I'm going to like the book. She does like talk about how it was kind of a disaster. I just feel like it was kind of played down a little bit more than maybe it should have been, but I think if you like Alexander the Great, if you like reading about Macedonia and that stuff, I think this is a great book to pick up, just because of like the Indian and Afghanistan campaigns and stuff are totally glossed over in favor of like Gaugamela and the Persians and that kind of thing in most Alexander the Great histories. All right, next up, we have American Woman, The Transformation of the Modern First Lady, from Hillary Clinton to Jill Biden by Katie Rogers, and I was sent by this from Crown. And I kind of picked this one up because I've seen a lot of people reading presidential biographies and that kind of thing. I think Theodore Roosevelt's probably the only president I've read like much of anything about, but when this book was pitched, I literally had no idea about anything that the First Lady actually does. And this book will kind of explain there's a reason for that, because there actually isn't a lot of there's not really a whole lot of, I guess, real executive function for the First Lady per se. And I guess it was kind of interesting. There's kind of a little brief overview of pretty much all the First Ladies in like one chapter, and then once we get to the 90s, it's kind of more of like a deep dive on each subsequent one. But it's kind of interesting how every single one basically was like, yeah, I'm not going to do like what my predecessors did. I'm just going to like do like my own thing. And they have to sort of like reinvent the wheel like every single time. So I actually found that pretty interesting. And I felt like the political commentary is actually pretty well balanced between like all the different policies that their husbands were making and which ones they were kind of like endorsing and that kind of thing. So it was definitely like eye-opening, as far as, like I said, like I never really have like considered like First Ladies as, I don't know, like I try to like keep my political stuff as low as possible, just with like everything going on and whatever, but I did find it pretty enlightening. So if you're into politics and if you're into like biographies and that kind of thing, I think this would be kind of a neat little pickup for sure. Next up, we have a Gloom and Doom book. I might do a reread of this one, like, or at least like kind of a fast perusal to kind of like data mine like all the facts and stuff for my new journal that I'm doing for Gloom and Doom. But it's Austin Frerich's Barons: Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry. And this will make you depressed. Basically, the big thrust of the book is how a lot of America's food sectors are owned by or run by oligopolies, which effectively are, there's like actually like a strict definition of what that is, but effectively only a few number of different companies own, I think, at least I can't remember if it was like 70% of like all the inventory of that that sector, and it kind of creates an illusion of choice. But, in the big scheme of things, it's really not. And kind of all their corrupt, shady practices is just really, really, really concerning. I'm trying to think. So it starts with his local state of Iowa, and kind of like just just the terrible hog industry that I mean, you kind of always know. I mean, the scary thing about this book is, with factory farming, especially with like animal husbandry, like factory like livestock and everything, we all know like kind of how bad that is. That takes like a backseat. Like that's in the book a little bit, but that's not even like the main thrust of why this stuff is bad. It's all like there's a lot more like to it. And that's, I guess, like the concerning thing too. But see, we deal with pork, we deal with beef, grain, berries, dairy, pretty much all these, pretty much all the problems with like all these different sectors, and how not only do they skirt the law in some instances, they basically have it built into their corporations and stuff to break the law and just kind of like do the penalties as just like a part of doing business and that kind of thing. And it's just like I said, just real concerning overall. I probably will, like I said, kind of go through this one again just to get like kind of all the data points and the facts and that kind of thing going. So before we get too much further, I do want to give a shout out to Magic Mind here. It is a mental performance shop. It's made from like plants and mushrooms and that kind of thing, but it's been helping me out actually quite a bit with my sleep regimen. Like I feel like I'm getting like a lot better sleep when I'm taking this, and it helps me with my morning routine. I did a video where I started trying to read in the morning. It's not something I normally did, but I think it has helped kind of bump up the volume of my book slightly, though there have been like some slight effects to that and that kind of thing. But like I said, overall I feel like my sleep has like definitely improved, and that makes it worth it to me. So thanks to Magic Mind for that. I'll leave a link in down below for I think it's up to about a 50% discount if you want to give them a shot. All right, so next up we got Fall of Civilization: Story of Greatness and Decline by Paul Cooper. And this was sent by Hanover Square Press. And this is a pretty thick book dealing with a bunch of different civilizations that have basically collapsed and fallen and kind of fell into the, the abyss of history. Though some of them, not so much the abyss per se, because it's been fairly recent. First thing, I did like how he did include a lot of like different like Central American cultures, some like East Asian cultures and that kind of thing. A lot of those kind of get glossed over in favor of, the fall of Rome, some of like, the Bronze Age collapse and that kind of thing. But like, for example, Carthage, Han China, the Khmer Empire, Byzantium, Easter Island, for example, they're all included. So there's 14 different civilizations that have collapsed. I will say it doesn't feel like there's like a big grand nice golden thread really running through the book, aside from the fact that things happen and these civilizations collapse. Each one definitely could, I think, each chapter is pretty meaty, and each one could almost just be kind of read in isolation from the others. I don't really think you'd like lose anything. I think partly that's a byproduct. Paul Cooper apparently runs a podcast known as the Fall of Civilizations, and I feel like it definitely shows a little bit. But I think anyone that kind of interested, especially in the kind of the more ancient history aspects of things, like with the kind of the mindset of like reading about like, the decline and fall of different civilizations and that sort of stuff. And as I said, there is a whole bunch of different civilizations that you might not even really be familiar with, and it'll kind of give you like a jump start to kind of think about, well, that actually seems pretty neat. Why haven't I heard of them before? And then kind of do like a deeper dive on them, which is what I did with one of them. So I think it'd be great for anyone that's kind of just interested in kind of the broad strokes of learning about history. Next up, we got The Great River, The Making and Unmaking of the Mississippi by Boyce Upholt and sent to me by W.W. Norton. And this is all about a history of the Mississippi River system in the United States. I found this really interesting. The only downside that I had with it was I was kind of hoping there would be a little bit more like biological history, ecological history. Maybe that's just me with like all my nature reads and that kind of thing, kind of wishing that was in there. It is discussed like really briefly, but it's definitely much more of a like just kind of straight up more regular political narrative of the past couple hundred years dealing with the Mississippi River system. But kind of this different like cultural impacts that it had between different things such as like trade, obviously is kind of the big one, trade and transportation, but also all the different like kind of political maneuvering and wrangling that was going on, and where the Mississippi River was sort of like the linchpin in a couple of different scenarios. Like probably the most interesting takeaway that I had from this one was basically when engineering was just starting to become like a really like solidified professional field per se. Before that, it was really just the Army Corps of Engineers, but the two like civil engineers and like the Army Corps of Engineers had like two completely different like ideologies on how to do like a ton of different stuff. And there was like the Mississippi River was almost kind of like I said, like the cornerstone that both sides were trying to like utilize to kind of like prove their points and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of like I said, political wrestling over doing different things in the Mississippi River, and like kind of like how to do their best to control it per se. But there's also a lot, like I said, there's a lot of reflection on sort of, can we actually control like nature in that way, and is it effective, and is it good in the long run? And then you're kind of dealing with some of the modern stuff too. Like for example, one of the last chapters deals with a steamboat captain, which I guess like a modern steamboat captain per se, a barge. It's not really a steamboat, but I find that like pretty interesting as well. Just how like the different like kind of ways of life have changed over the Mississippi River system. All right, next up is another, I think I did do a book review of this one, Means of Control. Let's see, How the Hidden Alliance of Tech and Government is Creating a New American Surveillance State by Byron Tao. And yeah, this is all about how everything we talk about, like tech, with cookies and everything like that, we just think, oh, why are the ads following me? Or, are our phones listening to us and that kind of stuff. And this book will tell you pretty much everything you've ever thought about that stuff is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much stuff you don't even know you don't know that's kind of going on. So it's very nihilistic in the sense, even the author, he tries to do a chapter where he's like, I'm going to try to be like basically untraceable and this, that, and the other thing. And he really like can't, just between like all the devices, like even if he turns all his off or gets rid of them or whatever, like just everyone else's devices can pick up on his stuff as well. Even things like tires in modern vehicles have like different sensors and that kind of stuff that can actually like record data and everything, which is like, he's just like, there's just not really a whole lot we can do after a certain point. We kind of like almost gave up our rights to a lot of that sort of stuff. But yeah, just like I said, very concerning. It was kind of interesting too how a lot of these, a lot of different apps start out with like a good idea, they're not making a lot of money, and then all of a sudden, they're like other companies will be like, hey, we'll just like pay you to like sell us the data that you've collected on like all your customers, and there's like technically like almost like nothing illegal about it. And then a lot of these companies almost just morph into just data collection and aggregation companies and that kind of thing. Kind of goes into the weeds, I felt like a little bit, but since I didn't know anything about this stuff, I felt it was pretty enlightening, very concerning, and yeah, like I said, there's a whole lot we don't, like most people don't even know that we don't know. So yeah, pretty much all the rumors are true, but it's even worse than you think. So yeah, I love how pessimistic this video generally is. Next up, we got a ancient history book. We got The Missing Thread, A Women's History of the Ancient World by Daisy Dunn. I've read one of her other books, The Life of Pliny, or The Shadow of Vesuvius, A Life of Pliny, and I really enjoyed that one. This one was sent to me by Viking Press, and I actually really, really enjoyed it. So it's kind of just a broad kind of overview of ancient history from the Near Eastern period down through, I think it was the Julio-Claudian dynasty is roughly when it ended, if I remember correctly. My only real critique of the book is I feel like once we do kind of get towards the end of the Roman Republic, in that fall of the Republic, and then in that first kind of imperial age of the Roman Empire, I feel like the book kind of slows down quite a bit because we have a lot more resources. Even though like women still like are kind of relegated to obscurity in the Roman world, compared to like the ancient Near East, there's still like a plethora of resources to kind of like utilize between like archaeology and reading between the lines and like the textual evidence and that kind of thing. But I feel like it slows down quite a bit compared to the rest of the book, so I feel like that could have probably been trimmed down a little bit. But what I do like is a lot of the earlier chapters are dealing with different ancient Near Eastern civilizations. For example, obviously like Sumer and everything, where we have the first, women poet. I'm glad she was included in there as well. But there's chapters on the Minoans and things like that. So I really did, like I said, I enjoyed the first 2/3 quite a bit. And like I said, it's kind of a broad ancient history, but with a focus on regular women too. It's hard to explain. A lot of times in ancient histories and books on like Greece and Rome and that kind of thing, when women are mentioned, it's always like, I wouldn't say always, but a lot of times it's, the prominent, like famous ones. Like, for example, like, as dealing with like the Romans, it's always like, for example, like all the wives of like the Caesars and things like that. You just don't really deal with like the common everyday person quite as much. But like I said, definitely that is like kind of the main emphasis of this book, that the lens we're kind of looking at with ancient history. And I'm glad how she struck a balance between, the famous ones that we do have like names for or know more about, and then kind of the everyday, common folk as well. So like I said, did really enjoy it. I just felt like it got slowed down just a little bit towards the end. Next up, we got Origin Story, The Trials of Charles Darwin by Howard Markel, and I've sent this by W.W. Norton Company. And this is all about the years leading up and work of the publication of The Origin of Species by Darwin, as well as its sort of reception with different reviews and kind of critical reception, that kind of thing. And then all the debates that happened like afterwards. So yeah, it's actually a fairly interesting story. And I think my actual biggest takeaway here is just the fact, like, I don't know, the greatness of having like really good friends that are like going to stick up for you and that kind of thing. Because whether it was kind of wrong or right or whatever, for example, Lyle and some of other Darwin's friends at the time during the publication, they kind of pressured him, Alfred Russel Wallace has like the exact same idea and he's like publishing soon, so you need to like step on it and that kind of thing. And he does. He's finally like, is like wrapping it up and whatnot. 'Cause he kind of wanted it to be perfect. But one of his children actually dies like within like a month or so of this time, unfortunately. And, he kind of goes into like his, obviously like, just melancholy and depression and everything. And just doesn't want to deal with a lot of it. So his friends actually go to, I can't remember, the conference, I guess. I don't know if it was actually technically a conference with the Academy of Science or and that kind of thing. But anyways, the publication, he wasn't present. Well, Wallace actually wasn't present either, but his friends like did all they could to kind of frame it so like Darwin would get like all the credit in like very like subtle ways and everything. It's hard to explain, but like I said, it just came away as like whether they were kind of being, mean to Wallace about it. Just the fact that he had like, having good friends in your corner like just means a lot. And it just kind of made me think, what if it was like the other way around and like Wallace got pretty much like all the credit and vice versa, and how would that have like happened over the past like 180 years and stuff. So I just found that like really interesting. I don't know, but like I said, if you enjoy reading about Darwin, like if you've read any of his like other biographies, like I said, or the Origin of Species, this kind of like does like a big detail on like how it actually got published, kind of the wrangling back and forth on like what people liked and didn't like, and the obviously the big debates between let's see, what's his name? Why am I Huxley and like Wilberforce and that kind of thing. Just found it really interesting, so very enjoyable. Next up, we have The Quiet Damage, QAnon and the Destruction of the American Family by Jessalyn Cook. I think this was sent by Crown, by Crown as well. And this is all about the rise of QAnon online and that kind of thing. And it's actually almost like a journalistic, it is a journalistic work kind of dealing with, I think it was like 5 or 6 different families where one of the family members basically goes down the rabbit hole with QAnon and drinks the Kool-Aid and puts on the tinfoil hat, and how it, in some of these cases, it really just absolutely like destroyed like some families, causing divorces, causing parents and their children to basically be irreconciled and that kind of thing, despite like even like illnesses and all that kind of stuff. So it was just kind of just crazy how some, like, I know a lot of people have like strong political opinions, but then like sometimes people go so far down that path where that's like their only identity at that point. And and like how damaging, and how QAnon kind of like did a good job kind of almost like brainwashing like certain I guess vulnerable groups of people into like kind of thinking about that kind of stuff. So anyways, I found it really interesting. This kind of a heavier read. I feel like there's another couple of those like coming up as well, but definitely enlightening. I mean, I knew about QAnon, but I didn't know like a lot of like the kind of like I said, some of the details on like how extensive and how I guess all the conspiracy, like, prediction and prophecy stuff that was kind of going on. I didn't, like, pick up on that, apparently, but, yeah. Anyways, I think we're about halfway through. I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the video, but I do run an Etsy shop, and I don't know when this video is going to be published, so it might be too late by then, but if you're trying to do some holiday shopping and that kind of thing, I know I've had people buy stuff from my shop before. And they've mentioned, I really do enjoy when people mention like they found the Etsy shop like through this book, the BookTube channel and everything like that. So anyways, I do custom work, all that kind of stuff. Just felt like I should plug that out just because it's getting close towards the kind of the cutoff point, especially if you want like gifts for Christmas and that kind of thing. But anyways, like I said, check it out. It helps me out a lot in that as well. So the most recent one that I've read so far for 2024 releases is Mike Cole's Steel Lobsters, Crown, Commonwealth, and the Last Nights in England. And I found this really interesting. So this is all about during the opening salvos of the English Civil War. The parliamentary forces had a basically super heavy mounted like cuirassier regiment by who was commanding it, Sir Arthur like Heselridge, I think is if I remember off the top of my head. But effectively they were like fully armored, like in plate mail, knights that fought with like carbines and stuff like that with guns and everything. I think they did have a sword too as well, so they're not charging with their lances and things like that. But they're kind of the last iteration of like the full plate armored warrior like on the battlefield. And it's kind of a description of the lead up to the formation of these regiments. It's kind of like a mini biography of Arthur Heselridge, which I did find pretty interesting. And they fought in about 3 battles over the course of a month. And the first 2 were kind of maybe not draws per se, but very like lackluster in the sense of there's not a huge takeaway like on either way, whether they're like great or bad or that kind of thing. But then on the 3rd battle, they get completely routed at Roundaway Down, and it's sort of like the very last hurrah of like fully plate mailed like warriors on the battlefield. So I found that just like it's just a really interesting, because like as the author states it in like his little like prologue, when he like found out about this when he was like younger, it's like knights with guns, like what's cooler than that, and that kind of thing. And then so he kind of did a deep dive on it like later on, and it's like I said, it's just kind of the last like the twilight age of like the armored knight. So I found that really interesting, and I was sent that one by Osprey. I think I've also read one of Mike Cole's like other books on the I can't remember, was it called Legion versus Phalanx? I think it was called. About the different battles between the Republican legions and the Greek phalanx. So I did enjoy that one as well. And then one more before we get to the top 4, we have When the Ice is Gone by Paul Bierman. What a Greenland Ice Core reveals about Earth's tumultuous history and perilous future and this was sent by W.W. Norton. And this is all about kind of the history of like the Greenland ice shelf, the glaciers there. And what I found the most, there's two big takeaways I think I found with this one. One is like I really enjoyed learning how like ice cores are actually drilled, what you actually do with them, like once you drill them, and then like what are the scientists looking for? How do they actually, in the laboratory, in like the freezers and stuff, when they take like an ice core sample, like what are they actually doing and how are they doing it? And so I really like kind of the behind the scenes of the lab techniques and like kind of the technical stuff kind of going on. I've read a couple of books like that this year. I do really enjoy that. And then another part, there's a big chunk in the middle of the book dealing with the United States military trying to make like not so they were kind of secret bases like at first, but not so secret basically Arctic bases in Greenland, where they basically just carved out headquarters and bases like in the Greenland ice sheet, including like rail tunnels and stuff like underneath and all that kind of stuff, during like I want to say it was the 50s and early 60s, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. But it was just kind of interesting, like reading about kind of the conditions. How does that even like work? What does that even? What are like the logistics of that? And we'll just say like they're pretty crazy logistics for sure. But also like kind of the mental toll that it takes on people. When you're in the dark and the cold, effectively just like nonstop, like all the time and everything. But like I said, it's kind of a blend of history and science, so I did enjoy it. And yeah, it is just kind of concerning, like the changing Greenland ice conditions, and people like just like push it aside and like joke about it and ignore it and that kind of thing. But it is a real problem that will have to be dealt with, sooner rather than later. So next up, we have the 4 of my favorite ones, I guess, for the 2024 releases. I think these first 3 are probably just all really good, and then the last one is definitely probably like my favorite. It's obvious that one's going to even be in the contention probably for a favorite of the year. So, anyways, let's start off with The Rise... Oh, excuse me. I was going to read the subtitle first. The Secret History of Sharks, The Rise of the Ocean's Most Fearsome Predators by John Long. And this was sent to me by Ballantine Books. And I'm a sucker for any hidden life of or the secret life of, and then insert plant or flora or fauna there. And this obviously is all about sharks. Now, I think I've read 4 or 5 shark books at this point in time, but what I really enjoyed about this one is it's the entire evolutionary history of sharks. So part 1 is like kind of proto sharks and the first sharks. Then part 2 is kind of like the Pleistocene age, where sharks are like kind of just super dominant. Not that they're not like dominant nowadays and that kind of thing. Then part 3, which is kind of I want to say the age of like the Mesozoic through fairly recent. You're kind of dealing with like megalodons and stuff towards the end there. And then part 4 is all about sharks in the current time period. Like, for example, megalodons, I didn't realize how recent they were and how they probably evolved to compete with different whales and that kind of thing. But that was only in the last like couple million years that they went extinct. So that's kind of just a weird concept and that kind of thing. But there's tons of like photographs and illustrations and charts throughout the book. Of course, I can't show any like as soon as I like find it, but like lots of different like illustrations of shark teeth and kind of how they're different and everything. Another takeaway I had from this book too was just how shark researchers, like how like of a cool like tight-knit kind of like subculture that is among scientists, and they actually all seem like pretty chill. And I'm sure there's probably some that like go against the grain a little bit, but they're all like super kind to each other. And I think this book, like you always read about like scientists when they discover species, sometimes they'll name it after their friends or colleagues and stuff. I think this is the book that probably had that the most often. People were just naming different species of sharks and stuff after each other and all their friends and like other scientists and that kind of thing. So it was just like really nice to like kind of like read about and that kind of thing. And I did enjoy the last section kind of dealing with, a big thrust of the book is sharks have dealt with like all these major mass extinctions of the past, and they've made it out. They've had to deal with X, Y, and Z. But we're probably the ones that are like really causing the most problem at this point in time, between overfishing and like plastic pollution and that kind of thing. They're having a very difficult, like some species in particular, are having a really difficult time kind of competing with us like on the planet and that kind of thing. So it's just kind of sad how they survived 4 different mass extinctions, but they can't survive us. They're unable to like adapt and everything, obviously, because we're doing it so fast. So like I said, just kind of sad towards the end there. But like I said, if you are interested in sharks at all, you like Shark Week on Discovery and stuff, you can't go wrong picking this book up for sure. All right, so probably the most depressing book I read, I guess heaviest, maybe not, it was pretty sad, but heaviest book for sure. This year was The Unclaimed: Abandonment and Hope in the City of Angels by Pamela Prickett and Stefan Timmermans. And this was sent to me by Crown, Crown. And this focuses mostly around LA, but the authors extrapolate the data for how this could apply to pretty much the majority of the United States. But it deals with the whole topic of when people pass, if they have no kith or kin or friends or family that claim the body, what happens there? And like, as a social worker, I vaguely knew, like, this has to happen occasionally or something, but I did not realize the magnitude of this problem. I just, like, the scale is just so enormous compared to, I guess, what I was envisioning. But it kind of deals with all the different entities involved between, like, the coroner's office, the investigators, that kind of thing, dealing with all the different, like, social workers and the morgue staff and everything that just have to, like, process the body and, like, follow, like, different, like, legal procedures and that kind of stuff. And the authors profile 4 different cases where this occurred in different all kinds of different walks of life and, like, societal aspects and that kind of thing, and kind of, like, their lives leading up to the situation where, their bodies went unclaimed from, like, the best of their ability, like, dealing with, like, interviewing with people and going through the records and that kind of thing. And just kind of shows, I guess, just, like, kind of a lot of cultural and societal problems that we do have just kind of, like, as a culture. Like I said, just very heavy, so, like, definitely brace yourself, prepare yourself. It is beautifully written in the sense of, like, just how delicate they handled this topic. Not a lot of authors probably can do that as well as they did, as far as, like, stating the facts and explaining the situations and processes and stuff. But like I said, still being, like, very, not even necessarily just polite, but just, like I said, just so empathetically to the situation and everything. Did really enjoy it. Very, like, eye-opening. But just like puts a bunch of, like, bells in your head, like, this is, like, causes for concern and that kind of thing. And then there is a couple sections towards the end of the book kind of dealing with what they think might be able to help, like, alleviate the situation. But, like, for example, a lot of people would probably assume, if you're just, like, super in poverty and your friends and family are in poverty, they're not going to claim the body and that kind of thing. And they said that while that is, like, something of an issue, it's, like, barely, like, on the list effectively. There's a lot more there's a ton of other factors that are much more, I guess, telling and, I guess, predicting whether that's going to, like, happen to you or not. But like I said, very heavy topic. I am glad I read it. Like I said, probably enjoyable is probably not the right word. I would say enlightening, maybe. But just, like I said, beautifully written and well handled from the authors for sure. Next up, we have a Civil War history, and it's Eric Larson's The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. So what this book is, as it says on the tin here, you're dealing with the outbreak of the Civil War, but you're really dealing more with a decade or two leading up to the bombardment of Fort Sumter. The timeline kind of goes back and forth between, different people around Charleston harbors, like the aristocracy, and their kind of, like, facade of, like, chivalry and this kind of thing, and then, like, kind of the different opinions in the North, dealing with Lincoln's election, kind of the backstory there. Just kind of all the resentment and everything kind of boiling up to a point. And then you have, like, the threat of Fort Sumter itself, the garrison there, and, kind of the two opposing sides, like, you can kind of get the vibe, like, neither of them really want to fight. But eventually, things just come to a head after a certain point. But like I said, I think I want to say, did I do a review? I think I did do a review of this one. It's, in a way, there's, like, almost, like, kind of a comedy of errors of all the mistakes both sides were making. I mean, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but just some of the errors and stuff both sides were making, just, like, left and right. It's kind of, like, almost a miracle, like, the Civil War didn't happen, like, earlier than it did, as far as, like, all the blunders and stuff that were kind of going on. But you definitely, like I said, you learn a lot about kind of the noble culture of the South and that kind of thing. Just for example, like, you always hear about, I grew up in Florida in the South a little bit, so I spent over a decade there, but you kind of, like, learn about, like, the lost cause theory and all that kind of stuff. And, states' rights is, like, the big thing, states' rights. And that, this book will, like, just blow the lid off that, like, completely. where like during like, you know, the Articles of Succession and stuff, they basically just declared, yeah, we want to have slaves, and that's like why we're seceding. So like the states' right thing gets totally just like completely like annihilated, as far as like an argument for the Civil War and whatnot. Not that the North was like a ton better, that you learn as well, but anyways, like I said, the last section is dealing with the actual bombardment of Fort Sumter and kind of like what happened there, what went on, and everything. But if you enjoy Civil War history, definitely pick it up. But it's not even so much, it's not like a military history in that sense. It's very, like I said, it's a lot of the political intrigue and stuff kind of leading up to it. But there's a ton of primary sources. I will say Larson has, from, I guess, from his other books as well, from what I understand, just has a way of picking the right documentary evidence to just kind of quote and insert in his books. And it comes off just really, really well done, for sure. And then lastly, probably my favorite of the 2024 releases here, we got this lovely book. We got John Ma's Polis, A New History of the Ancient Greek City-State from the Early Iron Age to the End of Antiquity. And I'm going to have to do like actually plan out like a review video for this one. I was sent this one by Princeton University Press. So yeah, it's not very often you get like these, just like a nice monumental, I guess, reworking of a history point from like ancient Greece, let alone something as like central like to like Greek history, ancient Greek history, as the Polis. So anyways, this book is I guess, how would you describe it? It's a history of kind of the like political, cultural, like ideological aspects of the polis from the archaic age, like the Dark Ages before the polis was actually really a thing, down through like towards the end of like Roman imperial times and that kind of thing. So you have this long, good thousand plus years continuity of the the polis as an operating, like, a functional unit in Greek society, and then kind of Greco-Roman classical society all around the Mediterranean, and even like kind of into the Near and Far East as well, if you include like Bactria and that kind of stuff. But what I really enjoyed about this book is he has tons of information and data and stuff, and he breaks it down pretty simply. I feel like this would be great for like graduate and college students and stuff, but also like regular people like me that are just kind of like really interested in Greek and classical history and that kind of thing. And he doesn't focus on just the big name polis. He talks about all these different like archaeological sites where they're just smaller polises and that kind of thing. And kind of shows like how atypical Sparta and Athens and Syracuse really were compared to like kind of the grand scheme of things with like regular size polis of just like a couple thousand, for example. But one of the big takeaways I think I'm taking away from this book is, from everything you read and kind of just like in the ether and whatnot, you kind of always have the vibe that the city-state, the polis system, right, the polis, its heyday is, the classical age of like, the 5th century BCE, between like the Persian Wars and eventually towards their kind of conquest by Macedon, for example. So the 300s and 400s BCE. And while that is kind of like probably like an age of like really quick development and that kind of thing, the argument of the book really is the polis just keep progressing even after like Macedon and dealing with like Republican Rome and that kind of thing. And like that's kind of more of like the heyday of the polis system is even like after like Rome and Roman conquest, because most of them were fairly autonomous and were basically allowed to kind of progress and do their own thing. And it's interesting how after like Macedon, after the like Chaeronea in the Macedonian conquest and stuff, ever since then, like even more, like while there was like democratic, obviously Athens being kind of like the big example there, there were some like kind of democratic polis. After Macedon, more and more city-states are going and utilizing different forms of like democracy, like, throughout, like, like while being lorded over by the Macedonians and then dealing with Rome and that kind of thing. Like kind of aristocracies and all oligarchies were starting to diminish, I guess, in power and extent, and just like democracies really were kind of like taken over as far as like even like kind of in the small scale, just kind of like I said, like regular polis of like a couple thousand people and that sort of thing. So I found that really interesting. There's tons of like archaeological evidence. The inscription evidence is collated very well. The author uses different maps, different charts, and that kind of thing. There was a famous, the Copenhagen, I can't remember off the top of my head, some Copenhagen Institute has a thing called the inventory, which is basically just like all the data collated on like every polis in existence that we like know of. And he uses that extensively, but apparently from what I understand, like looking online, the inventory for like the non-trained like classical scholar is very, very hard to navigate. And he makes like his own charts and things and graphs and stuff using that data. So like regular folks like me can like understand and everything. So like I said, just thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel like I rambled on quite a bit with it, but like I said, if you like ancient classical history, especially Greek history, you can't go wrong with Polis. I feel like this is going to be kind of like a standard work on, the city-state for probably like the next generation or so. So, yeah, just really, really, really well done. And when the author does have to like kind of go into the weeds, he does have like endnotes and stuff that kind of explain it a lot more rather than like just always using like the text itself to kind of like, flip over every single rock and that kind of thing, which I did appreciate. So there you have it. Those are the 15 books that I read so far. Well, like I said, I keep saying so far, but I'm like 99.9%. I'm not going to read another 2024 release this year. These are the 15 2024 releases that I read. Let me know what the favorite one that you read, if you read any new releases that came out this year, what it was for you. And out of these 15, which one would you be most interested in reading yourself? Also, if there is one that you want me to kind of review a little bit more that I don't have, like I said, I have a few of them that have individual reviews, but not many of them. Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see if I can cobble up something together. But whether you're reading 2024 releases or not, read victoriously.